What would you do if your boss suddenly fired everyone you worked with but kept only you? Would you feel relieved, guilty, suspicious? This is exactly what happened to Maria Rodriguez, a humble maid working in one of Manhattan's most expensive penthouses. But the reason behind the billionaire's decision wasn't what anyone expected. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why even the coldest hearts were moved to tears. Stay with me, because this gets emotional. It was a cold Monday morning in November when everything changed. Alexander Whitmore, a 42-year-old tech billionaire worth an estimated $8.3 billion, walked into the staff quarters of his Fifth Avenue penthouse with an expression no one had seen before. Not anger, not frustration, something darker. Something that looked almost like despair. 15 maids stood in a line, as they did every Monday for the week's briefing. These women had worked for Alexander for years. Some had been there for 5 years, others for 7. They knew his routines, his preferences, how he liked his coffee at precisely 6:15 a.m., how he wanted his shirts pressed with exactly 3 creases, how he demanded absolute silence before 9 a.m. Alexander was known in wealthy circles as one of the most demanding employers in New York City. He had fired staff for using the wrong brand of cleaning solution. He had let a chef go for adding a 1/4 teaspoon too much salt to his soup. He was meticulous, unforgiving, and utterly impossible to please. But that morning, he didn't look like the tyrant everyone knew. He looked broken. "I'm letting all of you go," he announced, his voice flat and emotionless. "You'll each receive 6 months' severance pay. Your final paychecks will be processed by Friday. I expect you to clear out your belongings by end of day." The room erupted. Gasps, questions. One of the senior maids, Patricia, who had worked there the longest, stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, what did we do wrong? Please, just tell us and we'll fix it." Alexander's jaw tightened. "This isn't about performance. I've made my decision. Everyone except Maria Rodriguez is dismissed." All eyes turned to Maria. She was standing at the far end of the line, her dark eyes wide with shock, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Maria was 34 years old, a single mother of 2 who had immigrated from Honduras 7 years ago. She had been working for Alexander for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 8 days. She wasn't the most experienced maid. She wasn't the fastest. She sometimes forgot which imported Italian marble cleaner Alexander preferred for the bathroom counters. So why her? The other maids didn't wait for an explanation. As they filed out collecting their belongings and whispering among themselves, Maria heard every word. "She must be sleeping with him. I always knew there was something going on. 3 years and suddenly she's the favorite? Please. This is so unfair." Maria felt her cheeks burn with shame, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that defending yourself often made things worse. She simply stood there, waiting, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. When the last maid had left, slamming the service door behind her, Alexander turned to Maria. For a moment, she thought she saw his eyes glisten with moisture, but he blinked, and it was gone. "Maria," he said quietly, "I need you to come with me." Maria followed Alexander through the sprawling penthouse, past the pristine living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, past the kitchen with its restaurant-grade appliances, past the library with its first-edition books that no one ever read. They walked down a hallway Maria rarely entered, the residential wing where Alexander and his family lived. He stopped in front of a door painted a soft lavender color. On it hung a wooden sign that read, "Sophie's Room," with little butterflies painted around the letters. Maria's breath caught. She had never been allowed in this room. No staff member had. It was the one place in the entire penthouse that was strictly off-limits. Alexander placed his hand on the doorknob, then paused. "What I'm about to show you," he said, his voice cracking slightly. Only 3 people in the world know about. My lawyer, my doctor, and now you. He opened the door. The room was beautiful. Soft purple walls covered with hand-painted murals of gardens and castles. Shelves lined with books and stuffed animals. A canopy bed draped with white curtains. And in that bed, propped up on pillows, sat a little girl who couldn't have been more than 9 years old. She was tiny, far too small for her age, with pale skin and dark circles under her eyes. But when she saw Maria, her entire face lit up with the most radiant smile. "Maria!" she exclaimed, her voice weak but filled with genuine joy. "Daddy finally told you. I knew he would eventually." Maria stood frozen in the doorway, completely confused. "Sophie? I don't understand." Alexander's shoulders sagged as he walked to his daughter's bedside and gently brushed her thin hair back from her forehead. "Maria, this is my daughter Sophie. She has stage 4 neuroblastoma, a rare form of childhood cancer. She was diagnosed 14 months ago. The doctors gave her 6 months to live. She's already outlived their predictions by 8 months." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. "Mr. Whitmore, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." Sophie reached out a thin hand toward Maria. "Don't be sad, Maria. I'm not sad." "Not when you're here?" Maria looked at the little girl, completely bewildered. "Sweetheart, I don't think we've ever met." "Yes, we have," Sophie insisted, her eyes sparkling despite her obvious exhaustion. "Lots of times? You just didn't know it was me?" Alexander pulled a chair closer to the bed and gestured for Maria to sit. As she did, he began to explain. "For the past 3 years," Alexander began, "Sophie has been in and out of hospitals. Chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments. Nothing has worked. 6 months ago, we brought her home. The doctor said there was nothing more they could do. They said we should make her comfortable and let her spend her final days somewhere she felt safe." He paused, collecting himself. "I have hired the best oncologists in the world. I have spent millions searching for a cure. I have contacted every research hospital, every experimental program, and I have failed. I have failed to save my daughter." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, the powerful billionaire looked like nothing more than a devastated father. "But Sophie," he continued, "she's been watching you." Maria blinked in surprise. "Watching me?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Through the cameras at first. Daddy has them everywhere for security. I was so bored in bed, so lonely, and I started watching the staff on the monitors in my room. Most of them just worked and didn't talk much. But you, Maria, you were different." "Different how?" Maria asked gently. "You sang," Sophie whispered. "Every day while you cleaned the library, you sang these beautiful songs in Spanish. Sad songs, happy songs, songs about home and family. My grandmother used to sing to me in Spanish before she died 2 years ago. Hearing you sing made me feel like she was still here." Tears began streaming down Maria's face. She remembered those quiet mornings in the library, dusting shelves, and singing the songs her own mother had taught her. She had thought she was alone. She had no idea someone was listening. "And then," Alexander continued, "about 8 months ago, Sophie started sneaking out of her room when she had the strength, just for a few minutes at a time. She would hide and watch you work." Sophie giggled weakly. "I hid behind the big plant in the hallway, and once behind the couch in the living room. You almost saw me that time." Maria covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. "All those times I thought I heard something, felt like someone was there." "It was me," Sophie confirmed. And I saw how kind you were, Maria. When you found that broken vase, the expensive one, you didn't try to hide it or blame someone else. You went straight to Mrs. Chen and told her the truth, even though you knew you might get fired. And when Thomas, the security guard, told you about his wife being sick, you brought him homemade soup the next day. You used your own money, your own time. Alexander leaned forward. 3 months ago, Sophie's condition worsened. She couldn't leave her bed anymore. She asked me if she could meet you, just once. I refused at first. I wanted to keep her illness private. I didn't want pity. I didn't want the media finding out. I didn't want to make it real by telling people. He rubbed his face with both hands. But she kept asking, every day. Can Maria come read to me? Can Maria teach me one of her songs? Can Maria come sit with me? And finally, 6 weeks ago, I gave in. Maria's eyes widened. 6 weeks ago? But I don't remember. I told you, Alexander interrupted, that I needed you to organize some items in the storage room on the residential floor. Do you remember? Maria nodded slowly. Yes, you said there were holiday decorations that needed to be cataloged. There were no decorations, Alexander said quietly. While you were supposedly working in the storage room, I brought Sophie in her wheelchair to sit just outside the door. You were humming while you worked. You didn't know anyone could hear you. Sophie sat there for 30 minutes, just listening to you, watching you through the crack in the door. When I brought her back to her room, she smiled for the first time in 2 weeks. Sophie reached out and took Maria's hand. Her grip was weak, but determined. You made me feel less alone, Maria, even when you didn't know I existed. After that day, Alexander continued, his voice steadier now, I started bringing Sophie to listen to you whenever I could, always hiding, always secret. She would sit in her wheelchair in the hallway, or I would leave her room door cracked open when you cleaned the nearby rooms. Your presence, your voice, your simple kindness, it gave her something the best doctors in the world couldn't provide. It gave her peace. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. 2 weeks ago, Sophie's doctors told me she has perhaps 2 months left, maybe 3 if we're very lucky. Her body is shutting down. There's nothing more that can be done. Maria felt tears streaming down her face. She squeezed Sophie's hand gently. That same night, Alexander said, turning back to face them, Sophie asked me for something. Not a trip to Disneyland, not a meeting with a celebrity, not any of the things most children would ask for. She asked if you could be her friend, her real friend. No more hiding, no more watching from a distance. She wanted you to know her, to spend time with her, to be here with her during her final weeks. He walked back to the bed and knelt beside it, taking his daughter's other hand. I realized something in that moment. All the other staff, they're excellent at their jobs. They're professional, efficient, skilled. But Sophie didn't need someone who could polish silver or fold fitted sheets perfectly. She needed someone with a kind heart, someone genuine. Someone who sang when they thought no one was listening, and who brought soup to security guards, and who told the truth even when it might cost them their job. Alexander looked directly at Maria. She needed you, and I fired everyone else because I need this house to be quiet. I need it to be peaceful. I need it to be a place where my daughter can spend her final days without schedules and staff meetings and the constant noise of a household running at full efficiency. I'm taking a leave of absence from my company. I'm going to be here every day. And I'm asking you, Maria, I'm begging you, to stay here with us. Not as a maid, as Sophie's friend, as someone who can bring her comfort in the ways that matter most. Maria couldn't speak. She looked at Sophie, whose eyes were starting to droop with exhaustion, but who was still smiling at her with such hope, such trust. "I'll pay you triple your current salary," Alexander added quickly. "I'll cover all your expenses. Your children's school tuition, your rent, everything, whatever you need. I'll hire people to come in and do the actual cleaning and cooking. All I'm asking is that you spend time with Sophie. Read to her, sing to her, tell her stories, be her friend. Can you do that?" Maria wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. She thought about her own children at home, 7-year-old Carlos and 5-year-old Isabella. She thought about how she would feel if one of them were sick, how desperate she would be to give them any moment of happiness, any relief from pain. She squeezed Sophie's hand and smiled through her tears. "I would be honored," she whispered. "I don't need triple salary, Mr. Whitmore. I'll stay because Sophie deserves to have someone who cares about her. And I already do care about her, even though we're just really meeting now." Sophie's smile widened. "Will you teach me the songs your mother taught you? The ones in Spanish?" "Every single one," Maria promised. "And I'll teach you how to make my abuela's arroz con leche, too. It's the best in the world." The weeks that followed were unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. She arrived each morning at 7 a.m., but instead of putting on a maid's uniform and collecting cleaning supplies, she went straight to Sophie's room with children's books, art supplies, and stories from her own childhood in Honduras. Alexander kept his word. He hired a small, discreet staff to handle the housekeeping and cooking, people who understood the need for quiet and privacy. The penthouse, once bustling with activity, became a peaceful sanctuary. Maria spent hours reading to Sophie, everything from fairy tales to Harry Potter to Sophie's favorite, The Secret Garden. They did puzzles together, painted watercolors, and watched old movies on the television in Sophie's room. And every day, Maria sang. She taught Sophie the lullabies her mother had sung to her, the folk songs of her homeland, even the silly songs she made up for her own children. On good days, when Sophie had more energy, Maria would carefully help her into a wheelchair, and they would sit by the living room windows looking out at Central Park. Maria would tell Sophie about the trees and birds in Honduras, about her grandmother's garden where papayas and mangoes grew, about the sound of rain on a tin roof. "Tell me about your children," Sophie asked one afternoon, her head resting against Maria's shoulder. Maria smiled. "Carlos is 7. He's very serious, always asking questions about how things work. He wants to be an engineer when he grows up. And Isabella is 5, and she never stops talking. She tells everyone she's going to be a princess astronaut veterinarian." Sophie laughed, a sound that made both Maria and Alexander, who was reading in a nearby chair, look up with joy. Sophie laughed so rarely now. "I wish I could meet them," Sophie said softly. Maria looked at Alexander, who nodded. The next day, Maria brought Carlos and Isabella to the penthouse. She had been nervous about how they would react to Sophie's illness, but children, she discovered, were more adaptable than adults. They didn't see the IV lines, or the pallor of Sophie's skin, or the way she could barely sit up without help. They just saw another child. Isabella immediately began telling Sophie about her stuffed unicorn collection, and Carlos, after a moment of shyness, started explaining the Lego spaceship he was building. Sophie listened with rapt attention, asking questions and laughing at Isabella's dramatic stories. For 2 hours, Sophie's room was filled with the sound of children's laughter. And when it was time to leave, Carlos and Isabella both hugged Sophie carefully and promised to come back soon. After they left, Alexander found Maria in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," he said simply. "That's the most alive she's looked in months." Maria wiped her eyes. "They'll come back next week, and the week after that, as long as Sophie wants them to." 7 weeks after Maria learned the truth, Sophie's condition deteriorated rapidly. She slept most of the day now, her small body finally succumbing to the disease that had been fighting for so long. But even in those final days, Maria was there. She held Sophie's hand and sang softly. She read passages from The Secret Garden, Sophie's favorite part where the garden comes back to life. She told stories about her grandmother's garden in Honduras, making Sophie smile even when she was too tired to open her eyes. Alexander rarely left the room. He sat on the other side of Sophie's bed, holding her other hand, watching his daughter with a mixture of love and devastating grief. On a quiet Tuesday morning in January, with snow falling softly outside the window and Maria singing a gentle lullaby in Spanish, Sophie took her last breath. She was surrounded by love. She was at peace. Maria held the little girl's hand for a long time after she was gone, tears falling silently as she continued to sing. Alexander sat motionless, his face buried in his daughter's blanket, his shoulders shaking with sobs. They stayed like that for an hour before the doctor, who had been waiting in the next room, quietly came in to confirm what they already knew. 3 weeks after Sophie's funeral, a small, private ceremony attended by only a handful of people, Alexander asked Maria to come to his office. She had expected him to let her go. After all, the reason he had kept her was gone now. But instead, he handed her an envelope. "Open it," he said quietly. Inside was a letter, written in a child's unsteady handwriting. It was dated 2 months earlier during one of Sophie's last good days. "Dear Maria," it read, "thank you for being my friend. You made me happy when I was sad. You made me feel less alone. You're the best person I ever met, and I love you very much. Daddy is going to give you something special because you deserve it. Don't say no. Please. Love, Sophie." Maria's hands trembled as she read. She looked up at Alexander, confused. He slid a folder across the desk. "For the past 8 months, I've been depositing money into an account in your name. It started as payment for your increased responsibilities, but it became something else. It became my way of thanking you for the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You gave my daughter joy in her final months." Maria opened the folder. Inside were bank statements showing deposits made twice monthly. The total balance made her gasp out loud. $275,000. "Mr. Whitmore, I can't—" "You can and you will," he said firmly. "Your student loan debt has been paid off. Your rent for the next 5 years has been prepaid. Carlos's and Isabella's education funds have been established and will cover everything through college. This money is for you to do whatever you want with it. Start a business, travel, save it. Whatever brings you happiness." Maria couldn't speak. She stared at the papers, unable to process what she was seeing. "But there's one more thing," Alexander continued. He pulled out another document. "I'm establishing the Sophie Whitmore Foundation for Childhood Cancer Research. I'm donating $50 million as the initial funding, and I would like you to sit on the board of directors if you're willing. Not as a token gesture, but because you understand what families going through this need. You understand the importance of compassion and human connection alongside medical treatment." Tears streamed down Maria's face. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing all this?" Alexander's eyes, those cold eyes that had terrified staff members for years, were warm now, sad, but warm. "Because my daughter loved you, and because you taught me something I had forgotten. Money can't buy the things that matter most. Kindness matters. Presence matters. Love matters. You gave those things freely to a little girl you barely knew, expecting nothing in return. That's worth more than all the billions in my bank account." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. The other maids thought I fired them because you were special to me in some inappropriate way. They were right that you were special, but wrong about why. You were special to Sophie. You made her final months bearable. You gave her friendship and joy and peace. And for that, I will be forever grateful. Maria stood and walked over to him. Mr. Whitmore, your daughter was special too. She taught me that we never know whose life we're touching. I was just singing songs while I dusted books. I had no idea someone was listening, someone who needed to hear them. Sophie reminded me why kindness matters, even in small moments, even when we think no one is watching. Alexander turned to her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he smiled. A sad smile, but genuine. Call me Alexander, he said. I think we've moved beyond formality. Then call me Maria, she replied. Not Mrs. Rodriguez, just Maria. They stood together in silence for a moment, two people brought together by tragedy, but connected by love for a little girl who had touched both their lives in profound ways. Will you accept? Alexander asked finally. The board position? The foundation? Maria thought about Sophie's letter, about the little girl who had watched her from hiding, who had found comfort in simple songs and acts of kindness. She thought about other children facing the same battle, other families desperate for hope. Yes, she said firmly, for Sophie. Today, the Sophie Whitmore Foundation has raised over $200 million for childhood cancer research. Maria Rodriguez serves as the Director of Family Services, ensuring that families going through pediatric cancer treatment receive not just medical care, but emotional support, companionship, and programs that focus on quality of life. Alexander Whitmore still lives in the Fifth Avenue penthouse, but it's different now. He's different. He works less, donates more, and has established multiple programs for families in need. And every Tuesday morning, without fail, he and Maria meet in what used to be Sophie's room, now converted into a peaceful library and memorial space. They sit together, and Maria sings the same songs she once sang while dusting books, the songs that brought comfort to a little girl who was watching from the shadows. The other 14 maids never learned the real reason they were fired. They still believe it was favoritism, politics, or something inappropriate. But Maria knows the truth, and she carries it with her every day. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. Sometimes singing while you work can save someone's soul. And sometimes being chosen isn't about being the best at your job. It's about being the best at being human. Sophie's favorite quote from The Secret Garden is engraved on a plaque in the Foundation's lobby. Where you tend a rose cannot help but grow. Sophie may be gone, but the love she inspired continues to grow, touching thousands of lives, all because one maid sang songs when she thought no one was listening, and one little girl heard them and held on just a little longer.